Friends, family, avid moviegoers, welcome back to Life is Art, a movie podcast. My name is Adam, and my lifelong friend Dave is hosting this with me. How are we doing today, Dave?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm good. This week we are tackling a relevant film, I believe. It's called I Was a Stranger. This one is put out by Angel Studios, which usually has a strong undertone of religious Christianity throughout their films. This one takes the story of five strangers that their stories kind of overlap and weave into each other to tell a universal story of an immigrant's escape out of Aleppo, Syria, into the United States. And there are opening elements of the film, which we'll tackle as we go through it and pick it apart, where I believe they're in Chicago.
Yep.
And the first scene, and where they get the title from, is ripped from a Shakespeare line that this is a stranger's case of inhumanity. And it talks about the danger that we face by being cruel to those around us. And then it pulls the words, I was a stranger, out of that, and then dives you right into this story about the first character, which is a doctor, a female doctor that has a pretty good reputation in Syria, that's saving a soldier. And as she's saving this soldier, the soldier actually pulls a gun on her to try to shoot the other patient she's saving, which the soldier views as a mortal threat. That's actually just a dying man. And she basically says, well, if you're going to shoot this guy, I'm not going to save you. And sets up this whole moral dilemma that the whole movie kind of spins around. And the soldier actually lets off a round in the emergency room as he's almost dying, and then she ends up saving him. And then the soldiers kind of step up, and that's where we meet one of the soldiers actually. And it's really interesting how all these characters kind of weave into each other, but they're all strangers, but they're all on this journey together. It was really powerful stuff, Dave.
We are shown a society that's literally imploding, right? Like all civil wars, this civilization is tearing itself apart. We see innocent civilians, including children, rounded up, summarily executed in the streets. It was a truly horrific conflict that, is in a way, like all civil wars. It's brother on brother violence, and it's really, really horrible. But again, I think that is trying to communicate something about just how absurd war is and how this could happen to any of us. We think we're safe and it'll never happen here, but I hate to tell it to people if you haven't noticed already, but this is the path we're on right now in America.
All you need to do is watch the news lately and to know that we are getting closer and closer every day. I thought the way that it intertwines children into the storyline was really
Mhm.
interesting because there's a feeling of innocence of the child.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Familial bonds on the screen, especially fathers and sons, are replicated again and again and again with the different characters. We see a lot of images of protective parents sleeping next to their young children, children for whom they'll sacrifice everything. And again, this is this universal human condition. Even one character in particular, very well played by a French actor, African origin, who is a human smuggler. He traffics in human beings. He plays a pivotal role in the plot of the film. But we see him at home with his son, who has some kind of, I don't know, asthma or some kind of breathing disorder. And he's very tender with him. He's taking care of him. Apparently, the mom is gone or dead. We don't know. We're never told. But he's all this kid has in the world. And that's juxtaposed with him, the same human smuggler, just ruthless when he's talking to his customers, these downtrodden refugees who are willing to give everything for just a sliver of a chance to get out of this limbo-like existence they have in a refugee camp in Turkey. So it's really like, showing you the humanity of this man, but also the brutality in the same soul.
Yeah, it's actually Omar Sy. He's a very famous French actor. He's been in
Sure.
a couple of the Lupin series on Netflix, which are phenomenal.
You mentioned before about the title of the film, which, yeah, there's the Shakespeare quote that opens it. But even before that is Matthew 25:35, which is Christ's instruction, right, to his followers, which is, for when I was a stranger, you welcomed me, which our American right wing seems to have interpreted to mean, when I was a stranger, you deported me. So in that respect, this film couldn't be more timely, and it's a pretty stinging rebuke, I think, of what a lot of nominal Christians in this country are tolerating.
Did you happen to see in the beginning of the movie with the slow pan? I believe it's Chicago,
Yeah,
the slow pan through the river, and they show the Trump Tower.
yeah, I did see that. Very much intentional, I believe.
Of course, yes. I thought it was nice and subtle and had a little sting to it.
Yeah, I mean, in this film, I found it to be excruciating to watch. I found there was almost too much pain and suffering to take in one viewing. There was another scene in particular that stood out to me on the same theme, which was the family, the Greek family of the captain. So one of the characters, the five principal characters, is a Coast Guard captain from the Greeks. And he and his wife, his child, and some other adults are sitting around a sumptuous meal. And keep in mind, this is juxtaposed with images of the refugees coming on this little dinghy in a storm, about to die with nothing to eat, right? And these Greeks are sitting around this beautiful meal, just complaining basically about the problems caused by immigrants in Europe. And then the very noble character of the heroic character of the sea captain, he turns to his number one, who's also at the table, and says, "How many lives have we saved? How many did we save since we started this operation?" And they're keeping track of all the people that they've saved and also the ones they've lost. And that just shows you that, no matter what your station in life, you have a responsibility to take it seriously or not. And it's up to you to decide on what you're going to do in the face of these circumstances.
Well, it's a little more detailed than that. His first mate remembers and is keeping an average count of the total number they've saved. And the captain, who I agree with you 100%, is presented as the definitely hero. They're all heroes in their own little way, and I mean that's the beauty of the movie. But he's definitely seen as this heroic character. He's actually keeping account of the ones he's lost. And I
Right.
thought that was perfect for his character, that he wouldn't remember the ones he saved. That's almost beneath, that count is beneath him. It's the ones he didn't get to save.
For some people, they might think, okay, this is a movie put out by this religious affiliated media company. Already that's kind of suspect, if you're not particularly religiously inclined. I would say try to get past that, put those feelings to the side. This is a serious movie. And it's a movie that played at the Berlin Film Festival and did very well there. It was shortlisted for an Oscar in another category. It's an important film, and these are real actors, and this is not like some B version of some soppy made-for-TV film. This is a real serious film, and I would say try to not approach it with any sort of prejudice. I wasn't sure myself what to make of it because the same company was associated with a not so great film a few years ago called Sound of Freedom that had a lot of issues that grossed over 250 million. And it turned out later that a lot of the claims of the film were just made up or false. So there was a lot of controversy around that. But I hope this film kind of clears the air for this company because it's a great film.
They've made some great work, and they always have this religious undertone to the movie. But I enjoy them because I think their movies have heart, and you don't find that in every movie nowadays. And
You
I
know,
think it's an important characteristic.
I really admire that about your stance, Adam. I don't think a lot of people in America today, seeing how, sort of riven we are as a society, would have the openness of mind to approach it that way. It's almost like, oh, you're in my camp or you're not. And there's not a willingness to just reach across the aisle and say, okay, well, what's interesting for you? What do you want to talk about? What do you want to make movies about? And I agree with you 100%. I have no problem whatsoever with the spirituality being portrayed here because, like I said, I think it's fairly universal. But on to the soldier.
Yeah, let's talk about the soldier a little bit because he plays a really interesting character. Because in the beginning, when they show him in his story, he's really gung ho for the Assad regime, and he's forced into this situation where they execute a child for doing graffiti. And you can tell that it affects this soldier. And then he has this situation where he sheds the top of his soldier uniform and tries to look more casual, and then goes to visit his father, who is obviously a resistance fighter. And then we see him confront his father and actually hold a gun to his father, and you just don't know if this guy is going to choose good or evil.
I thought he was a very interesting character, very conflicted. You could see a little bit of that family tension in his conversation with his father, who I guess fell on the opposite side of the ideological spectrum there in Syria. And it just showed, I mean, at one point, the father turns his back on his son and said, "You're dead to me," which is truly terrible, and that's what kind of makes him pull out the gun, right? He feels so rejected. I remember reading a profile of Syria before the war. This has been in the late 90s or early 2000s. Very, very common in Syrian society was an obsession with the film The Godfather, the great Francis Ford Coppola film, which is about a gangster family, of course. And this idea of blood feuds, of violence, of strong ties between the pater familias and the son, it really comes through in this film. This is a society that was really primed to explode into violence because it had been under political repression for so many decades between Assad and his father. So it's not an accident that it was set there. Again, I go back to the genius of locating the film there of all places. Could have been in Iraq, could have been in Afghanistan. You could have made a refugee film about Africa. You could have chosen any place. But to do it in Syria was an inspired choice. And I think the filmmaker himself spent some time with refugees from the Syrian conflict, and that was the genesis for this film.
He did because he gives a personal message in the end of the film. So let's
Yeah.
take it back to the movie. So in the beginning, we're with the doctor that needs to save people, whether they're good or bad. Then we shift to the soldier who is kind of on the fence and has this moral dilemma with executing children and is faced with this choice of which way to go. Then we go to the smuggler who really sees the world as it is, a very dangerous place where capitalism rules, and he needs to find a way out for himself and his son. And then the story goes to the poet. And the poet is basically a family man. And we see the essence of the family in this structure. And he basically has to tell his daughter, we can't take the dog with us. We can barely, and you need to leave the dog behind. And the daughter is just totally distraught by this and doesn't want to leave the dog. And then she becomes distracted and she actually hurts her leg going outside the fence, and he has to carry her, and that slows them down. But in each instance, this poet is forced to make crazy life or death decisions. And we've gone through the arc of having to save people, not knowing whether to save people or not with a soldier, accepting how cruel the life is, to finally the decision maker in the poet. And we actually saw him in the doctor story where he meets his brother, which is kind of just how all these stories weave into each other, which I think is the moral of the story, that you just never know when you meet a stranger when they're going to come back into your life. And I thought that was the beauty of this film, is that this woven texture that you meet, and each one, the decision gets compounded and compounded and compounded to where you're almost at this final decision where the smuggler has told the poet who's actually driving the boat with the refugees in it, because the smuggler doesn't go with them and they're confused by this. They basically just set them on with a motor that might run or might die, and with some gas in it, and then basically a compass. And they basically go head south and you're going to hit Greece. And if you do, great. And if you don't, and if the winds come and the weather gets bad and the seas get rough, that's life. And he's basically taking this, and the smuggler told him at the end, you should stab the boat, because then the rescuers can come and save you and feel like heroes. But if the poet had stabbed the boat, they all would have died. And there's a moment between the poet and his son where his son pleads with him. He says, "Don't stab the boat. We'll all die, Dad. Don't do it." And it's this pivotal moment where he basically throws the knife in the water, and you feel this sense of relief. And then 2 minutes later, his son is lost in the water because there weren't enough life vests for his son. So each choice that this guy has to make, he's confounded with another horrible choice or a horrible outcome. And that's where we meet, that's where we get intertwined with the story of the captain, who is basically presented as this hero, this savior. But even he, in the end, has to make life and death decisions. Who does he save? Who does he go after? Does he dive in after the boy? Because if he dives in, then his boat doesn't have a captain left. So at each point, we're faced with these crazy life and death decisions. And I thought that was the power of the movie, that you actually cared whether these people lived or died. And each time you think they're made it out of this, there's another giant boulder coming in the horizon.
Yeah, yeah. The movie made me think of a deck of tarot cards because they're called things like the doctor, the soldier, etc. And the idea is that it's sort of shuffled together, and then the movie is about the choices these people make or you make, right? When you encounter somebody else. There's also a notion from the Vedas in ancient India carried over into Greece that you never mistreat a stranger. Why? Because that stranger could be a god in disguise, right? And so you're really going to hurt yourself in the future, your future prospects. You can be turned into a frog if you do the wrong thing to a stranger, right? You have to greet them, and that's what lies behind a lot of the code of hospitality in countries like Greece or Italy, where they treat you very, very well if you come into their home. So, it just calls back to just like how wrong we're acting right now in America. This mania to get rid of immigrants. We're a nation of immigrants, but here we are deporting them en masse with these crazy numbers. Like we're going to deport 1 million people this year and taking American citizens off the road through smashing their windows, taking them out of their car. We talked on the podcast about the murder that took place in Minneapolis not long ago of an innocent American woman who was shot in the face by ICE. So we're really going through some serious upheavals, and I was really happy that we saw this film. It's an important film.
I agree. It was very timely, and I don't want to think that America views all immigrants that way.
No.
One man is brainwashing half of our country, and it's the poison of the lies that he spreads, not the people that hear them and believe them. But perhaps seeing a movie like this might move them. There are only a couple more things I want to add. There was a moment on the boat where they all wanted to where they basically had almost given up. The motor stopped running, and there's this moment, and I feel like this is where the Christianity of the film comes through. And it was important. It wasn't overdone, but they it's chaos. It's storming, the waves are rising, the engine is cut out. They've restarted it twice, but there's to no avail. And they have this moment where they start praying for God's mercy. And then in the distance, they see a light of the life of the ship that's about to rescue them. And I just thought that was a powerful. In the way they incorporated the music in this movie was perfect too. It was a very well done movie.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a central tenet for a lot of faith traditions that, it's when you give up a sense of control over your own life. And it's part of the AA mantra and technique as well. You have to acknowledge a higher power and you have to say, hey, you know what? I'm not in charge here. So, it's that serenity prayer. You just have to accept the things that you can't change and have the wisdom to know when you can and act in the right way. Really,
Dave, you
really
were
well
really moved
done.
by this movie. I remember calling you
Oh, yeah.
afterwards, and you were extremely distraught and sad, and it moved you. And to me, that's a sign of a great movie when it moves you that much. When you walk out of the cinema and you take those feelings with you.
It's a very well made film. For instance, details revealing character. You remember when the smuggler is in his car, we follow him through the marketplace. He's going to buy life vests for the customers later that evening who will depart for Greece. Now, does he count out? He knows he has 30 customers. Does he count out? No, he just takes a bunch of them from a shop and throws them in the back of his truck. And what's hanging from his rearview mirror? A little cash sign. So
Yeah, the
just think
dollar
about that.
sign.
All the little dollar signs. Just think of all those little details that reveal character through choice. Really well thought out film. See at the very end of the film, there's a medical mystery afloat in when we open on the hospital in Chicago. The doctors there, the specialists, can't figure out what's wrong with the kid, right? And then at the end of the film, this woman who we don't know, what her position is in the hospital at the start, we find out, well, she's a cleaning lady. And even though she's an accomplished medical doctor in Syria, saving people's lives, making urgent decisions, and just everybody respects her and looks up to her. Here in America, she's a cleaning lady, and she solves the medical mystery at the end of the film with a little post-it note, a little bit like Goodwill Hunting. She tells them where to look to solve their problem, and she's dismissed in that very same scene by a doctor before he sees her post-it note. He gives her a coffee cup to throw away, a disposable coffee cup, as if she's nothing but a cleaning lady in his eyes. You know, this little diminutively sized brown woman. And it just shows you, you know, like the tragedy of that, how much we underestimate the human potential of immigrants to our country, how we do so at our peril, and how fundamentally unfair that is to the people that we have around us, and that we see every day.
I feel like that's the message of the movie, Dave, that it spins what you think is simple, what you think is you're watching, but then it spins it around and lets you look at it from different sides. That this insignificant person, this lowly cleaner in our society, might actually have the key to save your child. I mean, my takeaway from this movie was that there are invisible strands that we can't see that weave in between us that connect our lives. And there's so many points in my life where I've looked over and you think it's a small world. I remember too, I had this discussion with my dad over Christmas, and he's been to over 50 countries around the
Okay.
world. And he mentioned to me about this one experience he had in China where they basically saw this family that was out doing something that they were doing. And he's like, Adam, you know, wherever I go, it's just people like us trying to live their lives and have their family with them. And I felt this through that movie that at each point, each story, the only person that isn't carrying a child with them is the soldier. But at each point, there's this moment of with this relationship you have with your child that you learn something from your kid that teaches you something about how you interact with the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. So maybe that's a good place to end this one, Adam. Loved it. Thanks so much for recommending it. I think everyone who's listening should go watch the film.
I agree. Have fun at the cinema.